Hey, welcome back to Horror Drift Stories. Before we start, tell me where you're listening from. I read every comment, and it's always amazing to see how far these stories reach. If you're into quiet, unsettling horror, make sure to like and subscribe. Quick note, there may be a few ads early on, but after the first 10 minutes, it's just the story, uninterrupted. So, settle in, let the outside world fade, and let's begin. Story 1. I had worked as an independent tower climber for almost 10 years. My job was simple in theory but brutal in practice. I climbed massive radio and television towers to inspect, repair, and upgrade the equipment attached to them. The structures were enormous, often standing in remote areas where no one else wanted to go. It was a job that required special certifications, physical strength, and most importantly, a complete lack of fear of heights. A few weeks ago, my life was not going well. Winter is always slow for contractors like me, and the work had nearly disappeared. Bills were piling up, and I was several months behind on my rent. Every night I sat in my small apartment scrolling through online job boards, hoping to find something, anything, that would keep me from losing everything. That was when I saw the listing. The job post looked strange right away. There was no company name, no logo, and no details about the organization offering the work. It only asked for a certified high-steel technician who could perform an overnight inspection on a remote broadcast tower. What caught my attention was the pay. The amount they offered for just one 8-hour shift was unbelievable. It was enough to erase every debt I had and keep me financially secure for almost an entire year. I thought it might be a mistake. Still, I sent a message through the contact link, explaining my experience and attaching copies of my certifications. The reply came less than 10 minutes later. There was no greeting and no explanation. The message simply contained a set of GPS coordinates located deep in a desert region and a short instruction telling me to arrive exactly at midnight. It also said that the payment had already been placed in an escrow account and would be released as soon as the inspection was complete. It sounded strange, but the money was real. I checked the escrow confirmation attached in the message. Everything seemed legitimate. So I packed my climbing gear, loaded my tools into my truck, and left the city just as the sun began to disappear below the horizon. The drive took a long time. I stayed on the highway for hours before eventually turning off onto a series of rough service roads. My tires kicked up thick clouds of dust as I drove deeper into the desert. The farther I went, the emptier the world became. There were no houses, no gas stations, and no passing cars. The desert stretched endlessly around me, a dark ocean of sand and dry brush. The only light came from the pale glow of the moon. When I finally reached the coordinates, I found a tall chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. A heavy metal gate blocked the entrance, secured with a large padlock. According to the instructions I had received, the key was hidden under a painted rock near one of the fence posts. I searched for a moment and quickly found it. I unlocked the gate, drove inside the compound, and parked near the base of the structure. The tower itself was almost impossible to understand until I stood directly beneath it. It rose straight up into the sky like a giant needle made of steel. The triangular lattice structure stretched nearly 2,000 feet into the darkness. To give you an idea of its size, it was taller than most skyscrapers. Massive guy wires extended from the tower to the desert floor, holding the structure steady. Red aviation lights blinked every few hundred feet, warning aircraft to stay away. The very top of the tower disappeared into the black night. I turned off my truck and stepped outside. The desert was incredibly quiet. The only sound came from the wind moving through the metal structure high above me. It made a deep, hollow noise that echoed through the empty landscape. At the base of the ladder, I noticed a small plastic equipment case resting on the lowest rung. The message I had received earlier mentioned that the inspection tools would already be there. I opened the case. Inside, I found a digital diagnostic meter, a fresh pair of heavy leather climbing gloves, and a laminated sheet of paper. I pointed my flashlight at the paper. It wasn't a technical guide like I expected. Instead, it was a handwritten list of 3 rules. Never look up past the highest blinking red aviation light. If the guy wires start vibrating to the rhythm of a song, unclip your safety harness for exactly 3 seconds. Do not acknowledge the birds. They are not birds. I stood there for a moment in the cold desert wind, staring at the page. My first reaction was irritation. Tower climbers often play jokes on each other, especially when a freelancer is working alone on a job. I assumed someone had left the note as a prank to scare me. The rules were ridiculous. The second rule was especially dangerous. Every tower climber knows one thing above all else. Never unclip your harness while on the structure. Our harness systems are designed so that you are always connected to the tower. Removing both clips means trusting only your hands and feet. One strong gust of wind at 1,000 feet could knock you loose instantly. I folded the laminated paper and stuffed it into my jacket pocket. Then, I put on the climbing harness, checked my carabiners, grabbed the diagnostic meter, and stepped onto the ladder. It was exactly 2 in the morning. Climbing a tower that tall is exhausting. You fall into a steady rhythm. Step up, pull yourself higher, clip the harness, unclip the lower hook, and repeat. After the first few hundred feet, your muscles begin to burn. The wind grows stronger the higher you climb, and the temperature drops sharply. By the time I reached 500 feet, the ground was already a distant shadow below me. The world felt strangely empty. There was nothing but steel beneath my hands and darkness stretching endlessly around me. At one point, I stopped on a small platform to catch my breath and drink some water. The tower swayed gently in the wind, which is completely normal for structures this tall. Still, the isolation felt heavy. I continued climbing. Hours passed slowly. Eventually, I reached the 1,500-foot platform, the largest resting area on the tower. This was where the thickest guy wires connected to the structure. I clipped both safety lines to the railing and leaned back into the harness to rest. My breathing was heavy in the cold air. Then, something strange happened. The wind changed. The steady, rushing sound suddenly shifted, and the giant steel guy wires stretching into the darkness began to vibrate. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but the vibration didn't feel random. It was rhythmic. The cables hummed like giant musical strings. The sound traveled through the steel and into the platform beneath my boots. Slowly, the humming formed a melody. It sounded like an old orchestral tune, deep and slow. A chill ran down my spine. I remembered the note in my pocket. If the guy wires start vibrating to the rhythm of a song, unclip your harness for exactly 3 seconds. My mind tried to explain it logically. Maybe it was some strange acoustic effect caused by the wind, but the melody sounded too organized. The vibration grew stronger. The platform began shaking violently. My instincts screamed at me to hold on tighter, not let go. Unclipping my harness felt like suicide. So instead of following the rule, I grabbed the metal hooks of my harness and checked that they were locked securely onto the railing. The humming became louder and sharper. The entire tower groaned under the pressure. Then fear pushed me to break the first rule. I looked up past the blinking red aviation light. The sky above the tower looked wrong. Normally, the desert sky is filled with bright stars, but the stars above the tower looked slightly blurred. As I stared at them, they began to move. They shifted slowly, expanding and contracting. Then I realized something terrifying. Those were not stars. The darkness above the tower had depth. Something massive was floating there. A huge creature hovered high in the atmosphere directly above the tower. It was enormous, easily the size of a stadium. Its body looked like a giant, floating mass of translucent flesh. On its underside were thousands of glowing spots that looked exactly like stars. It had been hiding in plain sight. Long tentacles drifted down from its body, slowly moving through the air. Suddenly, several dark shapes dropped from the creature and began circling the tower. At first, they looked like birds riding the wind. Then I remembered the third rule. Do not acknowledge the birds. They are not birds. The shapes moved closer. One of them hovered only a few feet away from my face. It had no feathers, no eyes, no beak. It was just a mass of wet flesh. A thin cord connected it to the massive body above. That was when I realized they weren't birds at all. They were extensions of the creature. One of the appendages moved toward my jacket collar. Without thinking, I swatted at it with my gloved hand. The moment my glove touched the creature's flesh, it stuck. Completely stuck. I tried pulling my arm back, but it wouldn't release. The appendage suddenly shot upward. My arm was yanked into the air. The force pulled my harness tight as the creature tried lifting me off the platform. If I hadn't been clipped to the railing, I would have been pulled straight into the sky. Then the massive body above began lowering itself toward the tower. Something changed in the air around me. The wind stopped completely. The pressure dropped. The creature was creating a vacuum. The air vanished from my lungs. I tried breathing, but there was nothing to inhale. My chest burned as my vision darkened. I was suffocating. My hand was still trapped inside the glove stuck to the creature's appendage. With the last strength I had, I twisted my arm and pulled down. My hand slipped free. The glove shot upward into the darkness, but the vacuum remained. I dropped to my knees, gasping. There was still no air. Desperate, I grabbed the satellite phone from my jacket and pressed the emergency call button. The call connected instantly. A harsh voice answered. Report. I struggled to speak. There's something above me. I can't breathe. The voice interrupted. Did you hear the song? Yes, I gasped. Did you unclip your harness? No. The man on the phone shouted angrily. The tower acts like a web. The wires send your weight vibrations to the creature. It knows exactly where you are. When you unclip your harness, you break the signal. It loses track of you. I can't breathe, I whispered. Unclip and drop, he yelled. Do it now, or it will eat you. The line went dead. Above me, the creature opened a massive mouth filled with rows of moving ridges. It was descending toward the platform. I had no choice. My lungs were burning and my vision fading. I grabbed the hooks of my harness. I unclipped them. Then I stepped backward off the platform. The fall was instant and terrifying. The world turned into rushing darkness. I counted in my head. 1. The wind roared back into my ears. 2. Air filled my lungs again. 3. I reached out blindly. My body slammed into a large satellite dish mount about 50 feet below. Pain exploded through my ribs, but I managed to grab a support pipe. I clipped my harness back onto the structure. For a long time, I just hung there, shaking. Above me, the humming stopped. The creature hovered for a moment, searching blindly. Without the vibrations from my body weight, it couldn't find me. Slowly, it drifted upward. Eventually, the fake stars blended back into the real night sky. I stayed there for nearly an hour before moving again. The climb down was slow and painful. Every step hurt. When I finally reached the desert floor, the sun was beginning to rise. I removed my harness and dropped it in the sand. I didn't care about the money or the equipment. I only wanted to leave. I drove away as fast as I could. Later, while driving through the empty desert, I turned on the radio, hoping to hear a human voice. Instead, I heard music, a slow orchestral melody. It was the exact same tune the tower cables had been humming. I shut the radio off immediately and kept driving. I am writing this from a cheap motel, several states away. I will never climb another tower again. And if you ever see a job offering huge money for a single night of work in a remote place, especially if they give you a list of strange rules, walk away. Just walk away. Story 2. The biggest snowstorm of the year had hit our town not long ago. Roads were closed, schools had shut down, and most of the area had lost power. A lot of people were miserable. But honestly, I was less bothered than most. I have always been more of a loner. That became even more true after I moved into my late grandmother's old house by myself. She had left it to me in her will before she passed away last year. Even now, I still do not fully understand why she chose me. I was grateful, of course. A paid-off house is not the kind of gift anyone turns down. Still, it surprised me. Out of everyone in the family, I had not expected to be the one she trusted with it. My grandmother was a complicated person, though I do not like calling her strange. Most of us believed she was suffering from dementia in her final years. On her good days, she was exactly the kind of grandmother anyone would dream of having. She was warm, loving, and generous to a fault. You could visit her for an hour and leave with a full stomach, a pocket full of cash, and the feeling that you were the most important person in the world. She always knew how to make people feel special. Even when you had done nothing to deserve praise, she would smile at you like you had. On her bad days, though, it was different. She became frightened and confused. Sometimes she spoke in half-finished thoughts, or stared out the window like she expected someone to be standing there. Other times she would double-check the locks again and again, muttering to herself as if she had forgotten what she was afraid of, but still felt the fear. Watching her fade like that was painful. I try not to think too much about those days. I just hope that wherever she is now, she is at peace and only knows the good moments. No matter what state of mind she was in, one thing never changed. She kept that house unbelievably clean. I mean spotless. It was like stepping into a place preserved in time. Every corner dusted, every dish put away, every floor polished. The house itself was a cozy little cottage on the edge of town, surrounded by about an acre of pine trees. It was painted white with brown shutters and a brown roof, with a long gravel driveway that connected to an old dirt road. It felt hidden from the rest of the world, which was one of the reasons I liked it so much. The inside of the house had a strange charm to it. My grandmother had traveled a lot when she was younger, and she had brought home all kinds of objects from around the world. The basement, in particular, was packed with old things she had collected over the years. There were carvings, masks, statues, fabrics, old photographs, and little relics from places as far apart as New Zealand and Brazil. Some of it looked beautiful. Some of it looked unsettling. I had boxed up most of it and stored it downstairs because I did not really know what to do with it, and because some of it made the house feel less like mine. Even so, her presence was still everywhere. Despite the odd decorations and the fact that the place was isolated, I had come to love it. It was peaceful, quiet, better than living in my parents' basement and pretending I had a plan for my life. Over time, I started making the house my own. I brought in my own furniture, hung up pictures, moved things around, and even installed a doorbell camera. At the time, it had seemed like a smart little upgrade for a house sitting out there by itself. I had no idea that camera would end up showing me the most disturbing thing I have ever seen. That evening, snow was falling so hard it looked like the whole world outside had been erased. Even though it was not that late yet, visibility was terrible. I probably would not have been able to see the fence in my front yard if I had tried. The power had gone out a while earlier, leaving the house in deep silence, except for a few devices, still running off battery backups. I lit a few candles to push back the darkness, made myself a cup of hot chocolate, and sat down with a book. It should have felt cozy, and for a while it did. The storm outside rattled the windows now and then, and the soft candlelight gave the living room a warm glow. I remember thinking that maybe losing power was not the worst thing in the world. It forced everything to slow down. At some point, I started drifting off, half reading and half dozing, when my phone suddenly buzzed. Someone is at the front door. For a moment, I just stared at the notification, not understanding it. Then, the meaning hit me, and every bit of sleepiness vanished. Who on earth would be out here in that weather? I stood up right away and moved toward the front window, trying to see through the storm. The snow outside was so thick, it looked like static on a television screen. I thought I saw something shifting near the porch, some dark shape moving through the white blur, and I knew I could make out footprints leading from the road toward the house. Then I remembered the camera. I pulled up the app on my phone and opened the live feed. What I saw almost made me drop the phone. There was a man standing on the second-to-last step leading to my front door. At least, I think it was a man. He was huge, easily close to 7 feet tall. Or at least he looked that way because of how much clothing he had piled onto himself. He was bundled from head to toe in thick layers that looked filthy, like the clothes had been dragged through mud or pulled from a dumpster. He wore what looked like a heavy snowsuit under an oversized coat. The sleeves hung strangely at his sides, and his entire body looked swollen and uneven under all those layers. The only visible part of him was his eyes. Everything else was wrapped up. His face was hidden behind layers of scarves, and over his head he had some kind of large winter hat underneath a hood. Nothing about him looked normal. Nothing about him looked right. He was standing completely still, facing the door, staring at it with dark, unblinking eyes. I noticed he was shaking. At first, I thought maybe he was freezing. Maybe he was homeless, lost, desperate, and trying not to collapse in the snow. For one brief second, I actually considered opening the door and helping him. Then I looked at his eyes again. There was something wrong with the way he stared. He was not looking at the house like a person asking for help. He was looking at it like he was waiting for something. Like he had all the time in the world. Like he knew I was already there. That feeling in my stomach told me I was much safer keeping him outside. Still, panic makes people stupid, and I made a very stupid decision. Instead of ignoring him or calling the police immediately, I decided to use the microphone on the camera to talk to him. The second I turned on the microphone, the speaker on my phone filled with awful sounds: crackling, wheezing, wet, heavy breathing, low grunt-like growls. I jerked the phone away from my ear in shock. For a second, I thought maybe he was injured, or choking, or too cold to speak properly. Trying to sound tougher than I felt, I forced myself to say, "Hey buddy, are you okay?" He did not answer. He just kept making that horrible noise while staring at the door and shaking. That was the moment I stopped thinking of him as someone who needed help. I turned the microphone on again and shouted, "Hey, this is private property. Get lost." No response. I tried again, louder this time. "Do you want me to call the cops?" That finally got some kind of reaction. The man slowly lifted his head and stared directly into the camera. Then he stepped closer and bent down in a way that made my skin crawl. He folded forward at a sharp angle, bringing his face right up to the lens. His breathing blasted through my phone speaker. Louder now. Rough and labored. I could see one eye clearly. It looked wild. Not angry, not exactly. Not confused either. It looked excited, like he was enjoying himself. My whole body went cold. Hey, man," I said, my voice coming out weaker than I wanted. "I want you off my pro." I stopped mid-sentence. Something moved under his coat. A thin, pale arm shot out from somewhere around the middle of his chest and grabbed the doorbell camera. For a split second, my brain refused to understand what I had seen. Then the image jerked wildly as the camera was yanked free. The screen blurred and went dark inside folds of clothing. I could hear muffled movement and something that sounded like a heavy, uneven heartbeat. "Hey," I shouted into the phone. "Put that back." Then, for the first time, the thing outside made a new sound. It was laughing. Ha, ha, ha. The sound was weak and breathy, but unmistakably amused. Something inside me shifted right then. Up until that moment I had been scared. Now, I was furious too. The fear was still there, of course, but anger had joined it. This creep had come onto my property in the middle of a snowstorm, terrified me half to death, and now he had ripped my camera off the wall and was laughing about it. I stormed toward the front door and pounded on it with my fist. "Hey, I'm done playing around. Put my camera back and leave, or I swear I am within my rights to shoot you." If anything, he laughed harder. Ha, ha, ha. That sound made me angrier. I turned and ran upstairs to my closet. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my old hunting rifle and loaded it. I did not actually want to shoot anyone. Even at that point, part of me hoped the sight of the gun would be enough to scare him off. I just wanted him gone. I hurried back down to the front door. Even through the house, even through my own footsteps, I could hear him outside, still laughing. "Hey, I raised my voice as loud as I could. "All right, I'm armed. I'm going to count down from 5. And if you haven't left by then, I'm coming out there." The laughter continued. 5. I could see the shifting shadow beneath the door, and it looked like he was trembling so violently his whole coat was shaking. I opened my mouth to yell 3, but before I could, he made a completely different sound. It was low and deep and unnatural. The noise rolled through the door like thunder. I stumbled backward in pure fright. I still do not know how to describe it properly. It sounded like a ghost trying to howl with no lungs. Like a groan dragged out of a graveyard. Like something dead pretending it still remembered how to make human noise. For a second I just stood there, frozen, staring at the door with the rifle in my hands. Then, adrenaline took over. "Okay," I shouted. "I'm coming out." I yanked the door open. No one was there. The porch was empty. The storm hit me immediately, snow blowing into my face, wind biting through my clothes. I stood there staring into the white darkness, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. There were footprints in the snow, large ones. They led to the house, and away from it. I switched on the porch light and stepped outside, following the tracks with my eyes. I was cold, angry, and still stupid enough to care about that camera. Then I remembered my phone. I glanced down at the app again, thinking maybe there was still some signal left from the camera. The image on my screen nearly made me fire the rifle by accident. I was looking at my own back. The camera was positioned somewhere behind me, pointed straight at me as I stood on the porch. I spun around and fired. The shot exploded through the storm and blasted a hole through the front door behind me. For a second, I thought I had shot at someone standing there. But then I realized the wind must have pushed the door partly shut as I turned. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. Then I saw the camera. It was sitting on the top step facing me, perfectly intact. I stared at it for a long moment, breathing hard. Slowly, I walked over and picked it up. To my surprise, it was not damaged at all. That should have been comforting, but it somehow made everything worse. Whoever or whatever had pulled it off the wall had done so carefully. I looked back toward the footprints. The snow was still coming down hard, and the tracks were already starting to disappear into the growing white blanket. In another minute or two, they would be gone completely. I shouted into the storm one last time, "Don't ever come back." For a few seconds, that gave me a little confidence. I told myself I had scared him off. I told myself it was over. I told myself this had been some sick joke played by a lunatic who wandered out here at the worst possible time. I turned back toward the house and reached for the doorknob. The second my hand touched it, I froze. Something wet and sticky coated the metal. I looked down at my hand. Then the truth hit me all at once. I turned away and vomited into the snow. By the time I could breathe again, I knew exactly what had happened. That thing at my door had not just stood there laughing. It had been doing something else the entire time. Something obscene, something deliberate. It had come to my house during a blizzard, stood outside in the dark staring at my door, laughed while I spoke to it, stole my camera, and then left its filth smeared all over my doorknob for me to find. Even now, writing this, I feel sick thinking about it. I scrubbed my hand raw in the sink for almost 10 minutes after I got back inside. Then, I cleaned the doorknob with enough bleach to strip the finish off the metal. I locked every door and window in the house, pulled the curtains shut, and sat on the kitchen floor with the rifle across my lap until morning. The storm kept raging outside. Every gust of wind through the trees sounded like footsteps in the snow. Every creak of the house made me jump. More than once, I thought I heard that awful breathy laugh again somewhere beyond the walls. But I could never be sure if it was real or if my mind was replaying it. At some point, during that endless night, I started thinking about my grandmother, about her bad days, about how she used to check the locks over and over, about how sometimes she seemed terrified for reasons she could not explain. We all said it was dementia. Maybe it was. But sitting there in that silent house, with the storm outside and that image of the man burned into my mind, I could not stop wondering whether she had seen something too. Maybe she had heard strange sounds at the door in the middle of the night. Maybe she had looked out the window and seen some huge figure standing motionless at the edge of the yard. Maybe she had tried to explain it, and nobody listened because it sounded impossible. I do not know. What I do know is that since that night, the house does not feel peaceful anymore. It still looks the same. The white walls, the brown shutters, the long gravel driveway, the pine trees surrounding everything like a wall. But now, the isolation feels different. Before, it felt private, safe, like I had my own quiet corner of the world. Now it feels cut off. Now when I look out the window at night and see nothing but darkness between the trees, I cannot help thinking that something could be standing there watching me, and I would never know until it wanted me to. I replaced the camera, of course. I installed 2 more after that, one facing the driveway and one covering the side of the house. I added brighter floodlights near the porch. I even thought about getting a dog, just so there would be another living thing in the house with me. But none of that has really helped, because the worst part is not what happened. The worst part is what I saw in the recording before the camera feed cut out. I have watched it back more times than I should have. Every time I notice something new. The way the sleeves on the coat hang wrong, almost as if there are not proper arms filling them. The way the extra arm came out from the middle of its chest. The way its eye looked into the camera, bright and thrilled, like it had been waiting for me to speak. And the shaking. At first I thought it was shivering from the cold. Now I am not so sure. Now it looks more like excitement, like barely controlled laughter moving through its whole body. I have not shown the footage to anyone. What would I even say? That some giant freak in filthy winter clothes came to my remote house in the middle of a snowstorm, breathed into my camera, laughed at me, and then vanished into the storm after doing something disgusting on my front door? People would either think I was exaggerating, or they would focus on the gross part and miss what really scares me. Because the truly terrifying thing is this: I do not think it was lost. I do not think it was random. I think it knew I was alone, and sometimes, late at night, when the wind is loud and the trees bend and scrape against one another, I find myself wondering if it has been back already. Not to the porch. Not close enough to trigger the camera. Just somewhere out there beyond the fence, standing among the pines, watching the house, waiting for another storm bad enough to hide its footprints. I still live here for now, but I do not know for how much longer. A free house is not worth much if you never feel safe inside it. I used to think this place was a gift. Some days it still feels like one. Other days it feels like I inherited more than just a building from my grandmother. Maybe I inherited whatever fear made her check the locks so often. Maybe I inherited the reason she kept this place so clean, as if she was trying to wipe away evidence of something she never wanted to talk about. Or maybe I am just trying to make sense of one horrible night that had no explanation. Either way, I know one thing for certain. The next time my phone tells me someone is at the front door during a storm like that, I will not talk to them. I will not threaten them. I will not go outside to investigate. I will lock myself in the furthest room in the house, keep the lights off, stay quiet, and pray that whatever is standing on my porch decides I am not worth the trouble. Because some things do not come to your door to ask for help. Some things come because they already know you are there. Story 3. Candy Andy was the nickname my friends and I gave to a strange guy who used to sell us drugs back in high school. Back then, most kids our age were satisfied with a little weed or maybe a pill at a party once in a while. But Candy Andy was different. He was the kind of dealer you only heard about if you were looking for something stronger, something that went beyond the usual stuff everyone else was using. We called him Candy Andy because of the pills he sold. They looked exactly like candy and even tasted like it. Bright colors, sweet flavor, smooth texture. You could almost forget you were taking something dangerous. We always met him in the same place, under the metal bleachers near the school's football field. Even now, years later, I still have no idea what he was actually giving us. The routine was always the same. We'd walk down to the field after school, sometimes late at night after a game, and he would already be there, waiting in the shadows beneath the bleachers. You handed him cash, he handed you pills. That was it. No talking, no explanations. He never told us his real name. He never told us what the pills were or what they would do. Were they uppers? Downers? Something else entirely? We had no clue. And honestly, we never asked. Back then, we didn't care about safety or consequences. We just cared that whatever he sold us worked. And it always worked. The pills were always some shade of blue. Different shapes, different sizes, sometimes shiny, sometimes dull. But they all had that same candy-like taste. Sweet, almost pleasant. Whatever was inside them hit hard and fast. It felt amazing at the time, like the world had opened up and everything suddenly made sense. We bought from him constantly during those 4 years. Dozens of times. Maybe even hundreds. He became a strange, silent part of our high school life. Then we graduated, moved on with our lives, and Candy Andy faded into memory, like so many other weird things from those years. 10 years passed before I ever thought about him again. It was during our 10-year high school reunion. The party had been loud and messy at first, just like you'd expect. People laughing too hard, drinking too much, trying to pretend they were still young. Eventually, the music slowed down, people started leaving, and the night settled into something quieter. A few of my old friends and I wandered out to the football field behind the school. The place looked smaller than I remembered. Funny how that happens when you grow up. We stood in the grass tossing a football around, talking trash like we used to, remembering old stories, who dated who got suspended, who got caught cheating on tests, all the stupid little moments that seemed so important back then. The sun had fully set by then, and the stadium lights were off. The field was dark except for the faint glow of the moon. That's when we saw him. At first, it was just a shape in the darkness beneath the bleachers, a figure standing perfectly still. Then, the moonlight shifted, and we could see his face. Candy Andy. He was standing exactly where he always used to stand, watching us. For a moment, none of us said anything. Then, one of my friends laughed. "No way," he said. Of course, we had to go over and say hello. I mean, this guy had been a huge part of our high school experience. We had spent years meeting him here. As we walked toward him, I felt something strange in my chest. Something I couldn't quite explain. At the time, I brushed it off as nostalgia. But later, I realized something that still bothers me. Candy Andy hadn't aged. Not even a little. 10 years had passed, but he looked exactly the same as he did when we were 17. Same pale face, same messy hair, same dull clothes. Not a single wrinkle. Some people just age well, I told myself at the time. When we got close, he didn't say anything. He never did. Before we could even greet him, he slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, clear plastic bag. Inside were 3 pills. Candy pills, one for each of us. He held them out toward us like he always used to. We didn't even think about it. Nobody gave him money this time. But that didn't seem to matter. He simply handed the bag to us. Then, just like always, he turned and walked away without saying a single word. The moment felt surreal. For a second, I felt like a teenager again. The smell of the grass, the cold night air, the quiet football field. It all came rushing back like a memory that had been waiting to wake up. My friend opened the bag. The pills were different this time. They were red. Back in high school, they had always been blue, but none of us cared. Candy Andy always had the good stuff. I picked one up and rolled it between my fingers. It was smooth and shiny, almost like a piece of hard candy you'd buy at a store. Out of habit, I touched it to my tongue. Sweet. Exactly like candy. Just like the old days, one of my friends said. We all laughed. Then the three of us walked out into the field and dropped down onto the cold grass. We used to have rules back when we experimented with drugs in high school. We thought we were being responsible, even though we clearly weren't. 2 people would take the pill first. The third person would wait about 30 minutes. If the first 2 seemed okay, then the third could take theirs. It was our version of a safety plan. So we played a quick round of rock, paper, scissors to decide who would wait. I lost, which meant I was the designated driver. I stretched out on the grass while the other 2 swallowed their pills. The night sky above us was clear, filled with bright stars. For a moment, it felt peaceful. Cold air moved across the field, making the grass whisper softly. I lay there for about a minute just staring up. Then I started to feel cold. Not normal cold. A deep, creeping cold that crawled across my skin like tiny needles. My arms prickled with a strange tingling sensation. I rubbed my hands together. I should have brought a jacket, I muttered. My friends didn't respond. At first I thought they were just relaxing, enjoying the high as it started to kick in. Then I smelled something. It was faint at first, but it grew stronger quickly. A horrible smell. Sharp, rotten, chemical. Ammonia. Anyone who has smelled it before knows that scent instantly, but mixed with it was something worse. The sickening smell of rotting flesh. I sat up slowly. The air felt thick and heavy. That's when I heard the sound. Wet sounds. Soft, squishing noises coming from beside me. I didn't want to look, but I did, and I wish I hadn't. Maggots. Hundreds of them. They covered my friend's face. They were crawling in and out of his eye socket, wriggling and twisting as they fed on the soft tissue. His eye was gone, half eaten, and the rest of his face was starting to collapse inward. But the worst part was his expression. He still had that same stupid, relaxed smile people get when they're high, like he had no idea what was happening to him. Or maybe he did. Maybe he just couldn't react. My brain couldn't process it. I just screamed. I scrambled backward across the grass, my heart hammering so hard it felt like it would explode. The other friend wasn't any better. His skin was splitting open in small cracks, and through those cracks, I could see movement. Tiny white bodies pushing their way out. More maggots. They were hatching from inside him. I stumbled to my feet, barely able to breathe. Then I saw something move beneath the bleachers. 2 green eyes glowing in the darkness. Candy Andy. He was watching. Something inside me snapped. I ran toward him. I don't even remember deciding to do it. My body just moved. I was screaming every curse and insult I could think of, my voice breaking with panic and rage. When I reached him, he didn't step back. Instead, he stepped closer. He leaned forward slowly, his face inches from mine. The smell of his breath hit me. It smelled like my friend's. Rotten, sweet, decaying. It was the first time I had ever heard him speak. His voice was quiet and calm. The red one makes the blue ones hatch. For a second I didn't understand. Then the words sank in. Blue pills. The ones we had taken hundreds of times in high school. The ones we had swallowed without thinking. Something cold and horrible settled in my stomach. I didn't stay long enough to ask questions. I ran. I sprinted across the field, through the parking lot, and into my car. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped my keys. When the engine started, I slammed the gas pedal down and sped away from the school as fast as the car could go. I didn't stop until I got home. That was 4 hours and 39 minutes ago. I'm lying in my bed now, under 5 layers of blankets. But the cold won't go away. My skin still tingles. It feels like something is moving beneath it. At first, I told myself it was just fear, just my imagination. But now I'm starting to feel warmth spreading under my skin. Wet warmth, like something alive, something hungry. The fear is making them move faster. I can feel them writhing. And now, they're starting to crawl. Story 4. I hadn't slept properly for almost 2 weeks. Every night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, waiting for exhaustion to finally drag me under, only to wake up again minutes later, in a cold sweat. The lack of sleep had started to destroy everything in my life. My head constantly throbbed. My thoughts moved slowly, and even the light from the office lamps felt like knives behind my eyes. By the time I sat across from Dr. Tennyson that afternoon, I was so desperate that I didn't even care how I sounded anymore. "Look," I said, rubbing my tired eyes. "I haven't slept properly in 2 weeks. If you don't increase my medication, I swear I'll lose my mind. I might even end up doing something stupid." It wasn't something I was proud of saying, but desperation doesn't leave much room for dignity. Dr. Tennyson sighed softly and rubbed his fingers across his beard. He had a calm presence that usually helped me relax. But today, even that calmness couldn't settle the storm in my head. "You really shouldn't say things like that, Gregory," he replied gently. "I'm required to take statements like that very seriously." His voice had a smooth accent that always sounded warm, even when he was scolding me. "I'm sorry," I said quickly. "It's just, I can't sleep anymore. Every time I close my eyes, the nightmare starts again." He studied my face for a moment, clearly seeing how exhausted I was. Dark circles hung under my eyes like bruises. After a long pause, he finally nodded. "All right, I'll increase the dose slightly," he said. "But you need to call me immediately if anything changes." Relief washed over me. "Thank you, doctor. Really. I hope this helps you get some rest," he said kindly. "What you're going through isn't permanent. We'll figure it out." I appreciated those words more than he probably realized. Once you become an adult, it's rare to find people who genuinely care about your well-being. After scheduling my next appointment with the receptionist, I stepped outside into the evening air. The wind was brutally cold and pushed straight through my thin t-shirt, sending chills down to my bones. I had been having the same nightmare every night for 5 years. It always began the same way. The moment I fell asleep, I wasn't myself anymore. I became someone else, an older man, at least 50 years old. Gray hair, thick eyebrows, hazel eyes. The first thing I usually saw was his reflection staring back at me from a car's rearview mirror. Then I would feel his hand gripping the key in the ignition. At first, the dream felt distant, like watching a movie through someone else's eyes. But as it continued, his thoughts and feelings slowly blended with mine, until I completely forgot who I really was. In the dream, I turned the key and shut off the engine. Then I stepped out of the car and walked across damp grass toward a small gate beside a house. The house belonged to a man named Bill Puntrell. In the dream, I somehow knew he was a school bus driver, a kind old man who had driven kids to school for years without missing a day. But recently he hadn't shown up for work, and people had started to worry. The man whose body I inhabited walked up to the gate and quietly pushed it open. The school bus sat parked in the yard where it always did. Gravel crunched under his heavy footsteps as he approached the front door. He knocked. No answer. He knocked again. The door slowly creaked open. Inside the house, everything looked perfectly normal. Just dark. Curtains covered the windows, and the electricity had apparently been shut off. The man turned on a flashlight. "Hey," he called out nervously. His voice always sounded strange to me, rough and uncertain. "Bill? You in here?" The house remained silent. He walked through the living room first. 2 armchairs sat near a small table. A television rested above the fireplace. Nothing seemed disturbed. Then he checked the kitchen. Everything looked tidy. Still no sign of Bill. "Bill, buddy?" he called again. No answer. He walked down the hallway, briefly shining the flashlight into a small bathroom. Finally, he reached the bedroom door. For a moment he hesitated, as if something about the door made him uneasy. Then he pushed it open. The room was empty. "Where the hell are you?" he muttered. He slowly walked back through the house. By the time he stepped outside again, the temperature had dropped dramatically. The sun was already sinking behind the trees, casting long red shadows across the yard. This was the point where the dream started to change. Instead of fully becoming the old man, I suddenly felt myself inside his mind, alongside him, 2 minds sharing one body. And every time, he whispered the same desperate words. "Please stop doing this to me. I can't keep doing this." And every time, I answered him in his own voice. "I'm sorry. I don't want this either." Neither of us controlled what happened next. Our legs carried us across the yard toward the parked school bus. Crunching leaves echoed under our feet. We stepped up to the bus window and raised the flashlight. Inside the bus, every seat was filled. Human shapes sat quietly under white sheets. For a moment, everything was silent. Then the bodies suddenly moved. The sheets fell away. Underneath them were rotting corpses with hollow eyes and decaying skin. They all turned toward us at the same time and screamed the same 2 words, "Come inside." They slammed their hands against the bus windows. The old man stumbled backward in terror. That's when we saw Bill Puntrell sitting in the driver's seat. His dead eyes stared directly at us. His mouth moved silently, repeating the same words as the others. Then he reached up and pressed the button that opened the bus doors. The corpses poured out of the bus like a flood. They grabbed our arms and legs and dragged us toward the entrance. We screamed and fought, but their grip was too strong. The moment our head crossed the doorway, I woke up. Every single night, always after about 15 minutes of sleep. Over and over again. The cycle had nearly destroyed me. That evening, after leaving the doctor's office, I walked home through the freezing streets. The city looked almost abandoned because everyone was preparing for a coming cold storm. By the time I reached my apartment building, my body felt completely drained. Inside my apartment, I took a long shower and looked at myself in the mirror afterward. I looked terrible. My eyes were red and surrounded by deep purple circles. I barely recognized myself. I sat on the edge of my bed holding the new pills Dr. Tennyson had prescribed. They were larger than the ones I used to take. Green capsules. I hadn't taken my medication in years because the nightmare seemed to react to it somehow. Whenever I used the medication, the corpses in the dream acted differently. Instead of screaming, they spoke calmly. They would simply stare at me and whisper the same words. come inside. It always made my stomach turn, but tonight I was too exhausted to care. I swallowed the pills and lay down. Almost immediately, sleep pulled me under. This time, the dream started differently. I woke up inside a cluttered house filled with hunting trophies and taxidermy animals. When I looked in the mirror, I saw the same old man again. Eventually, I discovered his driver's license. His name was Arthur Weaver, and somehow, learning that name made the dream feel more real than ever before. The dream continued, leading Arthur once again to Bill Puntrell's house. Everything happened just like before, until the bus doors opened. This time, the corpses dragged us inside the bus, and we didn't wake up. Inside the bus, there was something else waiting, something far worse than the corpses. A massive shadow shaped like a woman with the head of a wolf. Her glowing blue eyes stared directly into us. She spoke softly. "Hello, young man." Then she crushed Arthur's skull. I woke up screaming in my bed. For the first time, the nightmare had gone further than ever before. And for the first time, I realized something terrifying. Arthur Weaver was a real person, and Bill Puntrell was a missing bus driver, which meant the nightmare might not be a nightmare at all. It might be something much worse. Story 5. The other day, I had to speak with the counselor at school. I did not go there because I wanted to. One of the teachers must have said something about me because the counselor told me there had been concerns. She did not explain much, but I could guess what they were. I am too skinny. My hair is always a mess. I look tired all the time. People notice those things, even when they pretend not to. So I sat in her office while she looked at me with that careful face adults use when they are trying to make you feel safe without actually saying anything important yet. Her room smelled like tea and old books. There were little posters on the wall with cheerful messages about feelings and growth and self-worth. I kept staring at one of them because it was easier than looking at her. She started by asking about my home life and whether I was getting everything I needed. Right away, I knew I had a problem. My home life is not good anymore. I know that. I have known it for a long time. But my dad would never allow me to talk about it to anyone. He does not even have to say it out loud most days. I just know. So I lied. I told her everything at home was fine. I told her I was just naturally skinny. I tried to make my voice sound normal when I said it. But even to me, it sounded weak. She kept watching me. I could tell she did not believe me. Then she asked, very gently, "Are you sad?" I know I should have, but something about the way she asked made the truth slip out before I could stop it. "A little," I said. The second I said it, my heart started pounding. I felt hot and cold at the same time. I should not have admitted that. I should not have told her anything real. She leaned forward just a little and said, "Well, go on. Tell me why that is, Katie." I started fidgeting with my thumbs. I could feel my nails pressing into my skin. Inside my head, I argued with myself. One part of me was screaming to stay quiet. Another part was tired. Tired of being scared, tired of pretending, tired of carrying everything around in silence. In the end, the truth won, or at least part of it did. "I think my dad isn't related to me," I said. She blinked, but she did not laugh. She did not act shocked. She just tilted her head slightly and asked, "Oh? What makes you think that?" I swallowed hard. Once I had started, it became harder to stop. I looked nothing like him," I said. "My skin is smooth and pale, but his is tough and dark like ebony, and his hair is very bristly and blonde. and not on top of his head. I could feel tears building in my eyes. My voice started shaking, but I kept going anyway. And he only has 3 fingers, and instead of a, "Okay, Katie, calm down," she said quickly. She held her hands out in that soft, careful way adults do when they think a child is about to break down. I stopped talking. I pressed my lips together. My face was burning. She gave me a sad smile, the kind that feels rehearsed. "I understand how that must make you feel," she said, "but I'm afraid I should not insert myself into family matters of that kind." That confused me. Family matters of that kind? I had not even really explained it. Not properly. Not the important parts. Not the things that mattered most. But before I could say anything else, she kept going. "It's obvious this has been weighing very heavily on you," she said. "So here's what I want you to do. Write about it. Write about how you feel. Write about your worries, your anger, your fears, the things you love, the things you hate. Put it somewhere. On paper, online, wherever. It is not healthy to keep these things locked up inside." "Oh, okay," I said. "I will. And that is why I am writing this now. I am trying to do what she told me. I am trying to get it all out. My thoughts, my fears, my dad. My dad is a good man. I want that to be clear. He can be mean, yes. He can be frightening. He can make the whole house feel too small just by speaking. But I know he loves me. I know that with absolute certainty. Love is not always soft. Love is not always easy. Sometimes it is large and strange and hungry and terrible, but still love all the same. Even so, we are nothing alike. After talking to the counselor, I actually did feel better. Lighter, somehow. Like the secret inside me had loosened a little, even though I had not told the whole thing. I think it showed on my face, too, because my best friend, Daniel McCalby, noticed right away when we were walking home after school. Everyone calls him Danny. I have known him forever, or at least it feels that way. We walk home together most days because the path to my house starts behind the school. Over time, the 2 of us have walked it so often that we basically made our own trail through the grass and dirt. That afternoon, we passed under the school sign with its fancy lion logo and the words Carmichael Middle School written under it. I remember glancing up at it for a second. Usually I look back at the school when I leave, though I do not really know why. Maybe because school feels safer than home, even when I hate being there. But that day I did not. I just kept walking. Danny noticed immediately. "Wow," he said, giving me a sideways grin. "You must be in a good mood. You did not even do that weird, sad look back at the school thing." "Heh, I guess I am," I said. He shoved his hands into his pockets and walked a little closer to me. "Any specific reason?" "No. I mean, yes. But it's embarrassing, so I'm not telling." "Fair enough." Danny always laughs easily. I envy that about him. Everything seems easier around him. The world feels less heavy when he is talking. Even the quiet parts feel less lonely. After a few more steps, he said, "So, are you doing anything today? Want to go into the woods?" "Sure," I said quickly. "Yes. Let's go." I wanted to keep that lighter feeling for as long as I could, and that usually meant being with Danny instead of going straight home. Our town is surrounded by a thick forest. People say it is beautiful, and it is, in a way. Tall trees everywhere, dense green in the warmer months, dark and skeletal in the colder ones. But it is also the kind of place that can turn creepy very fast, especially when the light starts fading. Still, when I am with Danny, the woods do not scare me as much. I do not know why he always wants me to come with him. He is the kind of person who charges ahead without hesitation. I mostly trail behind him, watching where he steps, trying not to trip over roots. But he never seems bothered by that. We talk, we joke, or at least he jokes, and I try. My jokes are not very good, but he laughs at them anyway, which is kind of him. We know those woods well by now. We have wandered through them so many times that certain trees and rocks feel familiar, almost like old neighbors. That day we stayed out there for a while. We found some weird bugs under a fallen log. Danny found a stick that looked almost exactly like a sword, and he spent a good 10 minutes pretending to duel invisible enemies with it. I laughed so hard my stomach hurt. For a little while, I forgot about everything else. The sun started sinking before either of us noticed how late it had gotten. By the time we made our way back to the edge of town, the sky had gone soft and dim. Our houses are in opposite directions from there, so that is where we always split up. Danny kept the stick. I kept the bugs. I like bugs. I always have. Most people think they are gross, but I do not. I think they are cute. Small things are easier to understand. They do not hide what they are. A fuzzy caterpillar is just a fuzzy caterpillar. A big beetle is just a big beetle. They are honest in a way people are not. I held them carefully in my hands while I walked home. The fuzzy caterpillar tickled my palm when it moved. The beetle felt heavy and cool. For a few minutes, they made me feel calm. But the closer I got to my house, the more that familiar dread started creeping back in. It always happens the same way. First, I see the house through the trees. Then, I see the porch. Then I start listening before I even open the door, trying to guess what kind of mood he is in. By the time I stepped onto the porch, the boards squealed under my weight. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. Hello, I called. I'm home. His answer came immediately, loud enough to shake the house. Late. You are late. Bring me food. My whole body tensed. My dad's voice is hard to describe. It is deep, rough, and wet all at once, like stones grinding together underwater. Even when he tries to sound calm, there is always a bubbling gurgle underneath the words. I fed you yesterday, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I didn't think to set the trap for any. No, you have food. I smell it. He was in the kitchen. I could tell from the direction of his voice. I could not see him from where I stood, but I did not need to. I knew exactly where he was. I looked down at my hands. The bugs. These bugs? I asked softly. No, they won't fill you up. I did not want him to take them. That sounds stupid, maybe, but it mattered to me. They were mine, tiny, harmless things I had found on a good afternoon, and I wanted to keep them. For a moment, he did not answer. I could hear him breathing, though. Heavy, deep, patient. Then his voice came again, quieter this time. I'm sorry, Katie. I just need snack. He was trying to sound gentle. I could tell. But even when he lowered his voice, the words still carried that low, rumbling vibration. The sound seemed to move through the walls and floorboards. You know I like them, I said. My eyes were already filling with tears. Please. There was a long pause after that. I stood there in the doorway, clutching those little creatures in my hands, and felt that awful pull inside me. The selfish part of me wanted to run upstairs and hide them, but the bigger part, the part that had known him my whole life, could not stand the idea of him being hungry. It hurts to see someone you love in pain, even when they scare you, even when they are the reason you are afraid. So I walked into the living room and gently set the bugs down on the table. Then I turned and went upstairs, already crying. Behind me, from the kitchen, his voice came one last time. "Thank you." I stopped at the top of the stairs and looked back down. From where I stood, I still could not see all of him. The angle of the staircase hid most of the kitchen entrance. But I could hear the sound of him eating. Soft crunching, wet chewing, quick little swallowing sounds. And I could see his tail. It moved just enough to come into view at the bottom of the stairs, swaying side to side. It was long and segmented, and every time it bent, it made a clacking, cricking sound, as if each piece connected to the next with some hard inner joint. The sound echoed faintly in the dim house. I stood there watching that tail for several seconds. That was the part that always made it hardest to pretend. Because how do you explain a tail to yourself? How do you explain the 3 fingers? The bristly blonde hair growing where hair should not grow? The skin like dark bark or polished ebony? The shape of a body too large, too heavy, too wrong for any man I have ever seen. The counselor had looked at me like I was talking about feelings, like I was just a child, upset because she did not resemble her father enough, like maybe I was confused, or dramatic, or trying to say something symbolic that she could solve with a journal and a kind smile. But I was not speaking in metaphors. I meant exactly what I said. I do not look anything like him, because he is not like me. Sometimes I try to remember my mother, but I cannot. I do not know if that is because I was too young when she died, or because he never lets me ask questions. When I try, he always goes quiet in a way that makes the room feel dangerous. So I stopped asking a long time ago. All I know is that he raised me. He fed me. He kept a roof over my head. He told me stories when I was small, though his version of stories always had too many sharp teeth and too much darkness in them. He fixed things around the house with those 3-fingered hands. He tucked me in when I was younger, even if the end of his tail would tap against the doorway the whole time. He loves me, and I love him. That is the worst part. Because it would be easier if he were just a monster. It would be easier if I could hate him. Instead, I know the way his voice changes when he says my name softly. I know the tired sound in his breathing when he is trying not to frighten me. I know that he says thank you every time I bring him food, even when he has been angry before it. I know he tries, in his own way. But trying does not make it normal. Trying does not make home feel safe. That night, after I went up to my room, I sat on my bed and cried into my pillow so he would not hear me. Downstairs, I could still hear the faint clack of his tail against the floor now and then. Sometimes there would be silence, and I would wonder if he was listening too. I thought about the counselor's advice. Write it down. Get it out. So that is what I am doing. I do not know if this will help. I do not know if putting the truth into words will make it smaller or more manageable. Right now it still feels huge. It still feels like something crouched in the downstairs dark, breathing softly, waiting for the next time it gets hungry. Maybe the counselor would say, "This is all my way of coping." Maybe she would tell me I feel disconnected from my father because he is strict or different, or because I am growing up and noticing the distance between us. Maybe if I told her the whole truth, every last detail, she would still find a neat human explanation for it. Maybe adults do that because they have to. Maybe if they admitted that some fathers are not really fathers and some homes hold things they do not have names for, they would not know how to go on being adults. I do not know. I only know what I see. I know the house shakes when he shouts. I know he can smell food from rooms away. I know he prefers things alive when he can get them. I know his tail clicks against the floorboards. And I know that when I looked down the stairs tonight, after giving up the bugs I wanted to keep, I felt two things at the same time. I felt sad for him, and I felt afraid. Those two feelings have lived together in me for as long as I can remember. I do not think either one will leave anytime soon. Tomorrow, I will go back to school. I will probably sit in class and pretend to listen. Danny will probably make me laugh again. Maybe the counselor will ask if writing helped. Maybe I will lie and say yes. Maybe it did help a little. At least now the truth is somewhere outside of me. At least for one moment, I am not carrying it alone. But when school ends, I will still have to walk home. I will still follow that path, behind the building, through town, toward the house that waits among the trees. I will still step onto the porch and unlock the door. I will still call out that I am home. And if he is hungry, I will still listen for his voice, because no matter what he is the only dad I have ever known. And no matter what I am to him, I know he will answer. Story 6. I did not even know his name, but I still remember his hands. That is the first thing that comes back to me whenever I think about that morning. His hands were shaking so badly that the briefcase rattled when he forced it into my arms. I can still see it clearly, even now. Everything else in my life has started to blur around the edges, but that moment stays sharp. I used to jog at night, or very early in the morning. I did it because I hated being seen. My confidence was never great, and my body image was worse. When 2026 began, I made the same promise I had made the year before. I told myself I was finally going to get healthier, get stronger, become someone I did not feel ashamed of. It sounded nice in my head, but the truth was that I still had the same old anxiety. I could not stand the thought of strangers watching me pant and sweat and struggle. I have always been too aware of how cruel people can be, even when they are only looking. So I built a routine around that fear. I went jogging when the streets were nearly empty, just as the sun was starting to rise. That way I could run in peace, breathe as hard as I needed to, and pretend the whole town was still asleep. That morning, I woke up at 5. I remember because I checked my phone the moment I opened my eyes. I got dressed in my running clothes, filled my plastic sports bottle with the cheapest energy drink I had in the fridge, and left my apartment just as the sky was changing color. Golden hour had just begun. The air was cold in that clean, early way that makes everything feel temporarily harmless. The town I lived in back then was not beautiful, but it was not awful either. It was one of those plain Midlands towns that all seem built from the same faded plan. Rows of brick houses, small shops with signs that had not been updated in years, streets that looked tired even on bright mornings. Still, at that hour, with the sunlight just starting to touch the windows, it all looked softer than usual. I jogged past rows of houses, turned at a corner, crossed a quiet road, and made my way toward the bottom of the main street. My pace was not great. I had only just started taking the whole thing seriously again, so I kept slowing down to sip from my bottle and glance at the smartwatch my sister had given me for Christmas. I remember passing the small cafe where I worked during the week. I checked my watch right there and saw my heart rate sitting at 152 beats per minute. I felt embarrassed, even though no one was around to see it. I kept going up the hill until the street began to level out near the butcher's shop. My breathing was rough, but I stayed with it. I told myself that every step counted. Then I reached the next corner. That was where everything changed. I had not seen many people that morning. I rarely ever did on those runs. There had been an old man doing Tai Chi on his front lawn. someone I had noticed before on other mornings. I had seen movement inside one of the shops, probably the owner getting ready to open. A few cars had passed in the distance, but that was it. So, when I turned the corner and ran straight into a man, I nearly had a heart attack. We collided hard enough that I staggered backward into the wall. I started apologizing at once, the words tumbling out of my mouth, on instinct. But the second I looked at him properly, I realized this was not just another early riser out for a jog. He looked young, maybe around my age, but his face was wrong in a way I cannot fully explain. His eyes were wide and bulging, as if some terrible pressure had built up behind them. His hair was greasy and wild. He wore a brown suit that looked slept in, maybe even worn for days. He was grinding his teeth. His chest was rising and falling too fast. He looked like a man who had been running from something for a very long time. Before I could say anything else, he grabbed my arm. "Take it, man. You've got to take it," he screamed. Then he shoved a leather briefcase into my hands. It happened so fast that I barely understood it. 1 second I was just standing there in running gear with my sports bottle, and the next I was holding this heavy briefcase while a complete stranger stared at me like his life depended on it. I opened my mouth to protest, but he pushed past me before I could get a word out. The shove sent me spinning into the wall again. I shouted after him, telling him to wait, but he did not even look back. He stumbled out into the road and started looking around in a frantic, jerking way, as if he were surrounded by a crowd only he could see. I looked down at the thing now in my hands. It was dark brown leather, warm from where he had been carrying it. The clips were bronze with a gold tint, and the handle felt solid and expensive. Under normal circumstances, I might have admired it. It looked like something carried by a lawyer or an executive, not something that belonged anywhere near my tiny flat or my job making coffees. I looked back up at the man. He had moved farther down the street, switching from the road to the sidewalk and back again, like he was confused about where it was safe to be. I started after him, first walking, then jogging again, calling out for him to stop and take his case back. I never caught up. A car came down the street. I still do not know whether it was someone late for work or someone coming home half asleep from a night shift. It does not matter now. What matters is that they did not see him in time. He stepped directly into its path. I screamed before the impact came. But of course that changed nothing. The tires shrieked as the driver slammed on the brakes. The sound mixed with my own voice in one horrible burst. Then the man was on the road. The image has never left me. His lower body was destroyed. His pelvis and everything above it looked crushed beyond repair. His suit was torn and darkening fast. I dropped beside him, shaking so badly I could hardly move. I tried to call emergency services from my watch, but my fingers would not work properly. The woman who had been driving stumbled out of her car with her phone already in her hand, and she managed to do what I could not. Then she collapsed nearby, crying so hard she could barely breathe. I stayed crouched there beside him, useless and frozen. His eyes were still open. That was somehow the worst part. Those same wild eyes that had looked ready to burst a minute earlier were now fixed on the sky. And the strangest thing was that they no longer looked afraid. They looked calm, peaceful even. Whatever pressure had been inside him was gone. By the time the sirens arrived, the whole scene felt unreal. The driver's crying had changed into a weak, broken sound that reminded me of an injured dog. The paramedics came with that practiced calm people in those jobs seemed to wear like armor. They moved around me, around him, around the car, and soon Someone was guiding me gently away. Only then did I become fully aware that I was still holding the briefcase. No one had taken it from me. No one had even asked about it. In all the chaos, I had simply been pushed to the side as a witness, and the thing had remained in my hands. One of the paramedics told me kindly that I was free to leave once they had my details. I did not wait around after that. The second I was allowed to go, I hurried home with the briefcase still clutched against my side. I did not know what else to do. So I called my sister. She answered quickly. At first she sounded worried and kept asking if I was okay, but I told her I just needed to tell someone what I had seen. I think I hoped saying it all out loud would make it easier to understand. So I told her everything, from the moment the man crashed into me to the moment he died in the road. When I finished, there was a short silence. Then she asked, "What's in the briefcase?" "I'm not supposed to open it," I said. "Why?" "The man said not to," I replied. "He made it seem important." "Did he say why?" "No. I think you should open it," she said. That surprised me. "Why?" "It could be anything," she said. "Drugs, money, something dangerous, even a bomb. Better to know than not know." I gave a weak laugh, because she had a point. As we talked, I got up and walked over to where I had left the briefcase on my dining table, beside my coat and keys. Before touching it, I pulled my phone away from my ear and checked the time. 8:02. That was when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The call had ended. At first I assumed I must have hung up by accident, but then I saw the text on my phone from my sister. "Sorry for cutting you off. I have to take the kids to swimming." It had been sent 5 minutes earlier. I stared at it. My recent calls confirmed the same thing. The conversation with my sister had ended several minutes ago. So who had I been talking to after that? I do not know how long I stood there. All I know is that a terrible headache started building behind my eyes. It came on so fast and so hard that I had to sit down. I pressed the heel of my hand against my forehead and tried to breathe through it, but it only got worse. A deep sense of dread came with it, so sudden and complete that I became convinced I was about to have a stroke. My mother had died from one. That thought hit me at once. I stumbled into the bathroom, grabbed painkillers from the cabinet, and swallowed them with water from the tap. I stayed bent over the sink for several minutes, waiting for the pain to ease. It did not. Then, a strange idea came to me. So strange that I cannot explain why it felt reasonable at the time. I went back into the kitchen, grabbed the briefcase from the table, slid open the window above the sink, and threw it as hard as I could into the alley below. I heard it hit the concrete with a hard clatter, and almost instantly, the headache faded. It was like cool air blowing through my skull. Relief washed through me so quickly that I nearly laughed. I leaned against the counter, weak with it. I thought I had solved the problem. I had not. That night I went to bed exhausted. I fell asleep quickly. Then the nightmare began. I was trapped inside a tiny wooden space. It was so small that I could not move properly. The walls pressed against every part of me. It felt like being buried alive inside a box, made for someone much smaller. I screamed and pounded against what I thought was a lid above me, begging for help, but the space seemed to shrink more every second. My bones cracked, my flesh compressed. The pain was beyond anything I had ever imagined, yet I did not lose consciousness. I stayed awake inside that impossible suffering for what felt like forever. When I finally woke up, I was drenched in sweat. Moonlight was coming through the broken line of my blinds. I sat on the edge of the bed with my hands on my head, trying to calm myself. I got some water. drank slowly, then went back to sleep. The nightmare returned the moment I drifted off again, and it kept returning. The next day at work was unbearable. I felt like I had not slept at all. My body moved slowly, my mind even slower. I work as a barista, which is not what I once imagined for myself. I had studied archaeology and prehistory, and by the time I accepted that those interests were not going to pay my rent, I had already built up 20,000 pounds of debt. So there I was, making coffee for people who looked fresher and more rested than I felt, trying not to let my hands shake while steaming milk. That night, the nightmare came again. This time, I clawed at the lid until my fingernails tore backward. I felt the wood splinter under them. Tiny shards drove into the exposed flesh. The air in the box seemed to thin until every breath became an effort. I screamed until my throat felt torn open. And still, I did not wake. This became my life for the next week. Every night, I went into that tiny tomb. Every night, I felt myself crushed, trapped, buried, unable to die, and unable to escape. Some nights, there were variations. Sometimes, I wandered a spiral maze that seemed to go on forever. Sometimes I felt myself on the edge of relief, as if the pain was finally about to end, only for it never to come. Every dream was different, but they all carried the same feeling: claustrophobia, helplessness, endless fear. By Saturday, I was barely functioning. I had missed 3 days of work. I looked awful. My eyes burned when open and hurt more when closed. I kept hearing sounds that were not there, sharp pops and bangs that made me jump. I saw movement at the edges of my vision. I knew the briefcase was responsible. The nightmares had started the day I touched it, so I went looking for it. Finding it was easy, almost too easy. I felt pulled toward it, as if a string ran from somewhere inside me straight to the handle. The hard part was leaving the flat, looking the way I did. I felt every eye on me as I went down the stairs and outside, but I kept going. The charity shop next to my building was my first stop, and my last. A bell rang when I walked in. The old woman behind the counter looked offended by my presence. I probably looked half dead, sweaty, pale, shaky, breathless. I moved through racks of old dresses and unwanted jeans until I saw it. The briefcase had been taken in, cleaned up, tagged, and placed with the other odd donations. It cost £8. I bought it immediately. The cashier handed me the change, like she wanted me gone as quickly as possible. I left the shop with the case in one hand, and relief already spreading through me. By the time I reached my flat, the difference was unbelievable. The dread eased. My head felt cool and clear. I went straight to bed and slept without interruption for the first time in days. That should have terrified me more than it did. Instead, I felt grateful. That night, I woke sometime after midnight and went to the kitchen for water. The moonlight through the window lit the room enough for me to see the briefcase sitting exactly where I had left it, on the table. I sat down with a sandwich and stared at it while I ate. The urge to open it had grown stronger. It sat inside my thoughts all the time now, like an itch I could not scratch. But a man had died trying to keep it closed. That mattered to me. Whatever was inside it, he had thought it important enough to hand off with his final strength. So when I finished eating, I carried the briefcase into my bedroom, placed it in the wardrobe among old boxes and albums, and shut the door on it. I slept soundly again after that. My sister visited the next day. She thankfully missed the worst of how I had looked. We were close, and she knew something was wrong. But I kept the details vague. We drank coffee and talked about work, life, and our aunt's upcoming third wedding. She talked about her children, my niece and nephew, and I let myself enjoy that easy family conversation for a while. I have never had much luck with relationships, and I doubt I ever will, so I often told myself that being the fun uncle was enough. Eventually, the talk turned back to the briefcase. She asked if I had opened it. I smiled and told her no, that it was at the bottom of my wardrobe and would be staying there. She asked if she could have a look. I changed the subject. When she left, we hugged and promised, like always, to spend more time together soon. The next day, I had no work, so I planned to do nothing. I put on a film everyone said was brilliant and lay in my old chair, letting it play in the background while I scrolled on my phone. For a while, everything felt almost normal. Then I heard it. Knock, knock, knock. 3 clear knocks. I paused the television and sat still. A moment later, I heard it again. Knock, 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 knock. I got up and went to the front door, expecting to find a visitor. When I opened it, the hallway outside was empty. I looked both ways. No one. I stepped back inside. Then came the sound again. Knock, knock. This time, I knew it had not come from the door. I followed the noise to my bedroom and stood in front of the wardrobe listening. At first, I thought the sound must be coming through the wall from the next flat. Then it came again, unmistakably, from inside the wardrobe. I opened the doors. There were only boxes inside, and the briefcase. Knock, 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 knock. I could have sworn it moved slightly. I backed away so fast I nearly fell. That was the start of it. After that, the briefcase began making sounds almost every day. Knocking, voices, thunder, music that sounded ancient and wrong. I tried to tell myself there must be some kind of speaker hidden inside it, some mechanical explanation. But even I knew how weak that sounded. Whenever I seriously thought about throwing it away again, the headaches returned. The instant I decided to keep it, they faded. Along with the headaches came something harder to explain, a deep feeling of impending doom. I once read that people given the wrong blood type in a transfusion often describe that exact sensation, and before this, I never understood what it meant. Now I did. It became part of my daily life. I started spending less and less time at home. I took extra shifts. I stayed out drinking late. I slept at my sister's sometimes in the guest room. It felt like I was trapped in some abusive relationship with an object I could not escape. Then, in late February, things got worse. I was coming back from my sister's house one evening. I parked behind my building and walked through the alley between the flats and the charity shop. As I stepped out onto the main street, I glanced up at my window. The light was on in my flat, and a man's silhouette stood there. I froze where I was. I watched him for several seconds. Then he reached out and closed the curtains. I called the police. 2 officers came and went upstairs with me. The door was locked, no sign of forced entry. I opened it for them. They searched the flat, though searched is too strong a word. They glanced around and found nothing missing, nothing broken, nothing obviously wrong. In the end, the older officer asked if I had been getting enough sleep. He looked at the bags under my eyes and seemed to think he had solved the mystery. They left. But after they were gone, I noticed the wardrobe door was slightly open. I always kept it shut. I approached it carefully and nudged it wider with my foot. The briefcase sat right on top of the boxes now, though I had not left it there. And from inside it came a dull, rhythmic thump, like a heartbeat. I looked around for something to cover it with. A blanket, a coat, anything. Then I looked back. For just a second, it was open. Inside was only darkness. I blinked, slapped myself hard, and looked again. It was closed. Another trick. I shut the wardrobe and dragged my chair so that it faced the bedroom door. I sat there most of the night, watching. At some point, I must have fallen asleep. When I woke, I dressed for work and stumbled out. On the way there, I kept thinking about opening the case, just to end all of it. Every time I did, the headache came rushing back. When I swore to myself I would keep it shut, the pain eased. It was as if the case wanted to be opened and wanted to stay closed at the same time. And I was caught between those two demands. When I arrived at the cafe, my coworker Aisha looked confused. "Why are you here?" she asked. I stared at her. "Did I get sacked?" She laughed, then stopped when she saw I was serious. "It's your day off," she said. That made no sense to me. "What day is it?" "Sunday." I went cold. What?" "The 8th, she said, concern growing in her face. I had lost time. Not hours, days. Aisha sat me down, gave me water, and told me to rest. I fell asleep at the table. When she woke me later, it was dark outside. I thanked her and left, feeling a little clearer. Then, on the walk home, I checked my phone. 47 missed calls from my sister. My hands started shaking as I went through the messages. "How are you feeling today? Are you okay? I'm going to pop over. Hello? Hello? I'm coming in." Then the final one. "Why didn't you tell me you finally opened it?" I ran. I played the missed voicemails while I ran. And I wish I had not. Each one was full of screaming. High, muffled, desperate screaming buried under a terrible metallic noise that grew louder each time, like scrap metal being shaken inside a machine. A neighbor stood outside my flat when I reached the building. He tried speaking to me, but I pushed past him and ran inside. The briefcase sat in the middle of my apartment. Open. I slowed down as I approached it, dread pressing down on me so hard I felt sick. I knelt beside it and looked inside. It was empty. Empty except for writing set into the pale blue lining. The words spiraled inward around a figure carved at the center. A woman drawn in a style I recognized from an old university course. Jewish Babylonian Aramaic, ancient writing. The sight of it sparked my old curiosity for a second, but that was drowned immediately by panic. I had to find my sister. The neighbor said he had heard screams and seen a woman run from my flat not long ago. I called her husband as I ran downstairs. No answer. The drive to their house was insane. I cut people off, ignored horns, barely remembered traffic lights. When I got there, the neighborhood looked quiet. Too quiet. Their front door was unlocked. The smell hit me first. Blood and something like metal on stone. Then I saw the living room. My niece and nephew were on the floor, torn apart. There is no softer way to say it. They were destroyed. Blood spread across the room in one widening pool. I stumbled backward, choking. Then I saw my sister standing at the foot of the stairs. Her skin was white in a dead, waxy way. Her eyes were completely black. Her throat looked damaged, crushed. She was covered in blood. Somewhere deeper in the house, I could hear the dying sounds of her husband. She started walking toward me. I backed out through the front door and down the steps, unable to look away. "Sophie," I whispered. The thing wearing her body smiled. Then it shook its head. "Bagdana," it said in a chorus of voices. Not one voice, many, all speaking at once through her ruined throat. I turned and ran for my car. It lunged and knocked me down into the road. I scrambled away on my hands and knees, but suddenly shadow covered me. Something grabbed my hair and yanked me upright by the scalp. Pain tore through my head. It forced me to look at my sister's ruined face as it opened its mouth wider than it should have been able to. Then a metal bar smashed into the back of its head. A neighbor had come running with a crowbar. The blow did nothing. The thing dropped me and grabbed him by the jaw. With one violent pull, it tore his mouth open so badly that his jaw came loose. Flesh hung in strips as he collapsed. I crawled toward my car. The back door was open. Inside, by some instinct I did not understand, I reached for the briefcase. I took it out, opened it, and held it up in front of me. The creature stopped. It stared at the writing inside the case, then slowly lowered itself to the ground. It crawled forward on hands and knees, its finger tracing the spiral of words carefully toward the center. Then my sister's body collapsed. She is still in hospital now, in a coma. Doctors say she will need more surgeries. They believe some unknown attacker did all of it. They have no idea what really happened, and they never will. When she wakes up, and I believe she will, I will have to tell her about her husband and her children. I do not know how I will do it. I still have the briefcase. I know now that it is part of my life whether I want it or not, maybe for the rest of it. It screams sometimes, not all the time, but enough. The sound that comes from it now is like a man burning alive. Sometimes it knocks, sometimes it whispers, sometimes it sounds like someone praying in a language I do not know. I keep it shut. I keep it close. I live with it because I know the only way to free myself from it, and I am not willing to do that. Yesterday, someone came to my door asking if the briefcase was still for sale. I had not listed it anywhere, but somehow it had posted itself online, on Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace, complete with my address and a low asking price. Its tricks do not end. And the worst part is this: the longer I keep it, the harder it becomes to trust my own mind. I lose time. I hear things. I forget what I have said or done. Even now, sitting here and writing this, I keep getting the feeling that these are not my words. I do not remember deciding to write any of this. I do not remember sitting down. I only remember that man with the shaking hands, forcing the briefcase into my arms, as if he were handing off a curse too heavy to carry any longer. And now, it is mine. Story 7. When I was a child, I was scared of the dark in the normal way children are scared of it. I was afraid of what I could not see, of corners that looked too deep, of shapes that seemed to move when I stared at them too long. Back then, I thought fear of the dark was simple. I thought it came from imagination. I thought it would fade as I got older, the way people said it would. They always say that childhood fears disappear with time, that monsters only live in young minds, that one day you grow up and stop checking under the bed. They were wrong. I did grow up, but the fear did not leave. It changed. As a child, I was scared of the dark. Now I am terrified of it, because I know the dark is not empty. I know something can wait inside it. I know something once did. Even before everything happened, darkness always felt wrong to me. There was something deeply unsettling about the way daylight slowly died each evening. I used to sit and watch the last light stretch across the walls and floor, thinning out as the sun went down. It made the room feel like it was being pulled away from me. Familiar shapes became strange. Shadows from chairs and doors and toys would slowly blend together until I could no longer tell what was making them. It was like the room stopped belonging to the real world and became something else, something unclear, Something. That was why I loved my little nightlight so much. It was shaped like a plastic star, cheap and slightly scratched. But to me, it was one of the most important things I owned. It gave off a soft, gentle glow that made everything feel safe. It was not bright enough to light the whole room, but it was enough to keep the corners from swallowing the walls, enough to remind me that my room was still my room, enough to let me believe that nothing could come close while it was glowing. As long as that little plastic star stayed on, I thought I would be okay. This is the story of how I learned I was wrong. This is also the story of how I met my father for the first time. He was hiding in my closet. When I was growing up, my mother and I never had a real home. We had places we stayed, places where we slept, places where we unpacked, just enough to pretend we might remain there for a while. But we never had a home in the way other kids seemed to have one. Nothing lasted. There was always another apartment, another neighborhood, another rushed goodbye to a school, or a street, or a room I had just started getting used to. The pattern was always the same. My mother would become restless. She would start checking locks more often, staring through windows too long, listening for sounds outside. Then one day, she would say the words I hated more than anything. "Kyle, we need to go. Pack your things." And I would do it. I always packed the same things first. Clothes, my games, my console, the few small things that felt like mine no matter where we went. I tried not to complain because I knew it never helped. Most of the time I kept my frustration inside. But sometimes I was still a kid, and kids ask questions, especially when their whole world keeps changing, for reasons no one will explain. Whenever I pushed, my mother would give me one of her strange excuses. Sometimes, she said the neighbors were watching us. Sometimes, she said people were talking about us. Sometimes, she said my father had found a new job and we needed to move because of that. That explanation never made sense to me. I didn't have a father, at least not in any way that mattered. He was never there. There was no picture of him in any drawer, no old birthday card, no story my mother liked to tell. He was more like a word than a person, a vague excuse she reached for when she needed one. I had long stopped expecting anything real behind it. The move I remember most clearly happened not long after my 10th birthday. By then, I was used to change, but that time felt different from the beginning. We were living in a city apartment before that, a place with street noise and close buildings and lights outside the windows at all hours. Then, suddenly we were leaving it behind for a small house in a rural village, far from everything familiar. In my mother's mind, there was never time to waste. She always seemed prepared for escape, as if other people looked for restaurants or parks, while she looked for exits, routes, cheap rentals, places we could disappear into on short notice. We left the apartment within days. We stayed in a motel for around 2 weeks, living out of bags and eating food from paper containers, until she found the next place. We moved in without ever seeing it beforehand. The house was old, not broken beyond use, not a complete ruin, but old in a tired and neglected way that made me uneasy the second I stepped inside. It had the feeling of somewhere that had been left behind and only half remembered. The outside looked dull and worn, the paint faded, the windows dirty, the shape of the roof slightly crooked, as if the whole place had become weary of standing. Inside, the floors were made of dark oak that had once probably looked beautiful, but now were scratched and uneven. There was furniture already there, heavy old pieces with chipped corners and cracked polish. Some of it might have been expensive once, but by then it only looked sad. A wooden cross hung on one wall, instantly reminding me of long Sundays wasted in churches that smelled like dust and old perfume. Beside it was a painting of a meadow. The paint had begun to peel, and the edges of the frame looked damp and warped. I stood in the doorway taking it all in, while my mother brushed past me, without a word. She went straight for the cellar door and started fumbling with a set of unfamiliar keys, muttering under her breath as she tried each one. Her focus was absolute. Before she checked the bedrooms, before she looked at the kitchen, before she asked me if I liked anything about the place, she was trying to secure that door. At the time, I barely thought about it. That was just how she was. She had her priorities, and I had mine. So I headed upstairs to claim a room before she could suggest one for me. The house was gloomy even in daylight, but the room at the front looked best to me because it had a view of the street. The carpet was blue, faded in patches but still decent enough. There was an ugly old closet standing against one wall, the kind made of dark wood, with doors that never seemed to sit evenly. It looked ancient and unpleasant, but I figured that with enough posters and stickers, I could make the room feel like mine. It took me a while to get everything set up. I carried my bags upstairs one by one, spread out my air mattress, plugged in my console, and placed my plastic star nightlight where it would glow across the room once it got dark. My mother went out for food, leaving me alone in the house, while the last light of evening slid across the floorboards. Moving was always hard, no matter how many times we had done it. The first few nights in a new place were the worst. Every creak sounded different. Every hallway seemed too long. Every room felt like it had belonged to someone else and had not fully accepted me yet. That was why my mother had given me the nightlight years earlier. It was supposed to help with those first nights. In fairness, it usually did. It had always been just the two of us. As for my father, he was absent from my life from the beginning. I did not miss him in the normal way children miss a parent, because you cannot miss what you never really knew. Still, the older I got, the more I felt the shape of that absence. Other kids talked about their dads. Teachers asked harmless questions. School projects assumed every family could be drawn neatly with the same set of pieces. I learned quickly not to bring it up with my mother. She hated the subject. Even hearing the word father could sour her mood for hours. But she did talk about him once in a way that stayed with me. It happened while she was putting a padlock on the cellar door in another house, one we had lived in before the village place. I remember standing nearby and asking what she was always so worried about down there. Without even looking at me, she said, "Don't ever go into the cellar. Your father's work is not meant for you to see." I remember how strange that sounded. Your father's work, as if he had been there, as if he still was, somehow. After that, I noticed it more clearly. In every place we moved to, securing the cellar or basement was always her first concern. It did not matter if the kitchen sink leaked or a bedroom window would not lock. She went to the cellar first. It irritated me, but I had learned not to ask too many questions. Questions ruined her day, and when her day was ruined, mine soon followed, so I ignored it. That first night in the village house, I focused instead on the television screen, on my games, on the comfortable little glow of the star beside my mattress. As the sun vanished, the room changed the way all rooms do at night, but the soft electronic light from my lamp and TV kept the darkness back. It made the room feel manageable, temporary, but manageable. Eventually, I turned everything off except the nightlight and lay down on the air mattress. The plastic star cast its pale glow across the blue carpet, the old closet, the cracked walls. For the first time in that house, I closed my eyes and tried to sleep. At some point in the night, I woke to a voice. "Kyle." It was so faint I almost thought I had imagined it. Kyle, wake up. I opened my eyes slowly. The room was black, not dim, not shadowy, completely black. For a moment, I could not understand what I was seeing, or rather, what I was not seeing. The nightlight was gone. The street light outside the window was gone. Every shape in the room had been swallowed whole. I stayed perfectly still. Even my breathing felt too loud. Every time my chest moved, the air mattress made a soft plastic creak that seemed enormous in the silence. Then I heard another sound, a tiny movement, a twitch of wood. The closet door eased open by a few inches. From the darkness inside it, a face appeared. Or maybe face was the wrong word. At first, all I could really make out were eyes, huge and black, like holes cut into the dark itself. They were fixed on me, watching me from between my hanging shirts and jackets. Someone was inside my closet. Someone who knew my name. There was a blackout. The voice whispered. I could barely speak. Who are you? The answer came softly, almost kindly, which somehow made it worse. I am the shepherd. You are my little plastic ground sheep. I did not understand the words, but I understood enough to know I was in danger. Then he retreated deeper into the closet, disappearing back into the darkness. Follow me, he said. I did the opposite. I jumped off the mattress and ran to the light switch, slamming my hand against it again and again, even though his words had already told me it would not work. Nothing happened. Of course nothing happened. The power was out. The house remained pitch black. I did not look at the closet again as I hurried toward the bedroom door. I kept as much distance between me and it as I could. The upstairs hallway had felt strange during the day, but in total darkness, it felt alive in a way I hated. The walls seemed closer. The air felt thicker. I ran one hand along the old tapestries and rough wallpaper just to keep from losing my sense of direction. My plan was simple. Find my mother. Everything would make sense once I found her. I reached her bedroom and put my hand on the cold handle. For 1 second I hesitated. Then I pushed the door open. Her bed was empty. That scared me almost more than the thing in my closet. My mother was always in control. She was always somewhere nearby. The idea that she was not in her room, not asleep, not answering, made the whole house feel suddenly deeper and stranger than before. I whispered for her at first, then called louder. No answer. I moved downstairs carefully, trying not to trip over boxes or loose boards. The house made small noises all around me, settling and breathing in the dark. By the time I reached the bottom floor, my hands were shaking. Then I saw it. The cellar door stood open. From below, a weak, flickering light spilled upward. Candles. I froze. Every memory of my mother locking cellar doors came back to me at once. Every warning, every silence, every strange explanation. I wanted to turn and run out the front door, but my mother was somewhere in that house, and the only place left was below. I stepped closer to the cellar and reached out to pull the door shut. For a second, I almost managed it. But then I heard something from below. Not words, not clearly, more like someone moving slowly in a space where no one should have been. I let go of the handle. My mouth had gone dry. The kitchen was dark behind me. The moving boxes looked like crouching bodies in the corners. A thin line of light slipped from under the storage room door nearby, and as I approached, the door drifted open on its own. I do not know if it truly opened by itself, or if I pushed it without realizing. Memory becomes uncertain around fear, but I remember the feeling of inevitability. That feeling that once you have stepped too far into something, your choices are no longer really choices. I followed the candlelight. The stairs down were narrow and rough, and the deeper I went, the colder the air became. Wax had melted down the sides of the candles, leaving pale trails like tears. Their flames shook gently in the stillness, and the shadows they cast crawled over the dirt walls and old support beams around me. Then I heard the voice again. "Why do we bury those we love?" it asked softly from somewhere below. "Why do we pull them farther from heaven and raise a wall of dirt between us? Do we condemn them to the other place?" The words meant nothing to me then, but the voice did. It was the same voice from the closet, calm, patient, waiting. I reached the bottom of the stairs. The cellar did not look like a normal cellar. It looked more like a cave someone had tried to tame. The walls were packed earth. Wooden beams held them back in places. The air smelled damp, raw, and old. Candles lined the floor in a path that led toward the far end of the room, where the ground had been disturbed. There was a hole there, freshly dug, or at least recently opened. Beside it stood a rough, wooden cross. I moved closer. My whole body wanted to run, but my legs kept taking small steps forward. When I peered into the hole, I finally saw her. My mother. I still do not know if she was dead already when I found her, or dying, or beyond anything I could understand. I only know that she was down there, still and wrong, and impossibly far from me, even though the grave was only a few feet away. "Mom?" I called. No answer. Louder this time. "Mom." Then the voice spoke again behind me. "Wherever she is, there is either fire or sky. There is light either way. Do not be afraid, my child, my plastic ground sheep. I will guide you to a meadow with endless grass." I did not turn around. I could not. Something in me understood that if I looked at him fully, if I really saw him there in the candlelight, some line would be crossed that could never be uncrossed. So I ran. I ran back up the stairs, through the dark house, past the rooms that no longer felt like rooms, and out the front door into the black night outside. There was no moon, no comforting streetlight, no soft glow from a window. The darkness outside was complete and heavy. And even now, years later, that is the darkness I think of when people casually say they are afraid of the dark. Not dimness, not shadow, not nighttime, true darkness, the kind that feels hungry. He let me go. That is something I have thought about for years. He could have stopped me. I know that now. If he was in my closet, if he was in the cellar, if he was whatever I think he was, then nothing I did that night should have saved me. But he let me leave. I ran into that moonless black and he let me go, almost as if he wanted me to understand that escape was not the same thing as safety. Because even as I fled, I felt the promise of him behind me. Not footsteps, not hands. A promise that he could return whenever he wished. What followed was exactly what you would expect, and somehow much worse because of how ordinary it all sounded. Police, questions, flashlights, search teams, careful voices, forms, neighbors who had seen nothing, my story spilling out in broken pieces, sounding unbelievable even to my own ears the moment I said it aloud. No one reported a night so dark that the world seemed erased. No one reported a figure in a closet calling himself the shepherd. No one cared about the strange grave in the cellar in the way I thought they should. Or if they did, they never told me the truth. My mother's disappearance and death were treated as unsolved. People used words like tragedy, instability, trauma. People spoke around me more than to me. Eventually, the adults around me built a version of the story they could live with, one that fit into paperwork and official language. I never believed it. I knew what I had heard. I knew what had spoken to me in the dark. As I got older, I tried more than once to make sense of the things my mother used to say. Her constant moving, her urgency, her habit of locking cellars before doing anything else, her strange comments about my father. I started to wonder how much of what I had once called paranoia had actually been fear. Real fear. Maybe she had not been running from neighbors, or bills, or ordinary life. Maybe she had been running from him. And maybe, for a while, she had managed to stay ahead of him. That thought has haunted me almost as much as the memory itself. Because if that is true, then she knew. She knew what my father was. She knew he was close. She knew what he did in the dark places under houses. And still she could not keep him away forever. I have spent years trying not to think of him as my father, because the word feels wrong. A father is supposed to be a person you know, a face you can remember, someone who exists in daylight. What I met in that house was not that. What I met knew my name, called me his child, and waited inside a closet until the lights went out. If blood alone makes a father, then perhaps he was mine. But blood is not enough to make something human. Even now, I cannot sleep in total darkness. I have lamps in every room of my apartment. I own backup lights and battery packs, and extra bulbs and candles. I never light because I do not trust candlelight anymore. I check my closets. I check under beds, though I know that is childish. I keep the hallway lit at night. If the power goes out unexpectedly, panic hits me so hard I can barely breathe. People tell me trauma can make the mind connect things that do not belong together. They tell me darkness is only darkness. They say what happened that night may have been shaped by fear, by grief, by the confusion of a 10-year-old boy who found something horrible and survived it. They mean well. Sometimes I nod. Sometimes I even pretend to agree. But they are wrong. Because once, years after that night, there was another blackout. Only for a few seconds. Just long enough for the room to go completely black. And in those few seconds, before the emergency light came on, I heard the soft creak of a closet door opening somewhere behind me. I did not turn around. I did not breathe. And in the dark, close enough to touch, a familiar voice whispered, gentle as dust, settling over old furniture. My little plastic ground sheep. That is why I am no longer simply afraid of the dark. I am terrified of it. Not because of what might be inside, because of what I already know is.